Well, thank you everyone for your singing. We're not celebrating me today. Celebrating is just the title. So, yeah. Yeah. So, obviously, as I think Denise mentioned here, we're celebrating last weekend this week. We're celebrating our 250th birthday. And it was mentioned, I read somewhere, that they took a poll, said 53% of Americans, that's just slightly over half, don't know really what we're celebrating for 250 years. We know it's America's birthday, obviously. And so just to clarify, we are celebrating the adoption of the Declaration of Independence on July the 4th, 1776. So that's what the celebration is about. And they have a big fancy title for it for 250 years. And if I'm saying this wrong, somebody correct me. Semi-quincentennial? Does that sound about right? Anyway, so yeah, that's 250 years of that our country has been in existence. Now, after the Declaration was signed and adopted, we had a Revolutionary War, and the Constitution came. I think it was 13 or some years later. So there was still a lot to be done. But that's when we recognized the birth of the country. And if you've never read the Declaration, or it's been a long time since you've read it, see Pastor Harv afterwards. You can read his shirt. But there's something else I wanted to read to you here. It's actually from the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. And it was an answer to a question. The question said, I'm from another country and am visiting some of my relatives here who are in graduate school. I asked them what your festival on July 4th means, but they were not sure. Does it have something to do with your Christian religion? And here's the answer they gave. July 4th commemorates the day in 1776 that our nation declared itself to be an independent nation and no longer a colony of England. On that date, a number of our leading citizens signed what is known as the Declaration of Independence, stating our determination to become a free country. Our independence did not come easily. Only after several difficult years of war would it finally be won. Nor were our first years as a nation free from problems and controversies, as is still true. But our forefathers were determined to establish a free and democratic system of government, and the Declaration of Independence, together with our Constitution and the Bill of Rights, became the foundation for this. They have stood the test of time, and on July 4th, we give thanks for the wisdom and faith and courage of those leaders. Although it is not a religious holiday like Christmas or Easter, for many Americans, July 4th is a time to reflect on God's goodness to us as a nation. Molded into the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, which proclaimed our independence, are these words from the Bible. This is from Leviticus 25:10. Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. Our legal system reflects our Judeo-Christian roots. While we look with gratitude to the past on this July 4th, may we also look in faith to the future and commit it and our lives to God and His will. The ancient words of the psalmist are still true. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. And that's from Psalm 33:12. So we celebrate our nation's birthday here today, and is it biblical that we do celebrate? Well, the Bible has a few things to say about celebrating, and it has something to say about government. And Romans 13 probably says it best. I think we have that. There it is. This is Paul reading. You can read with me or I can read it. It's fine. It says, every person is to be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. I'm going to look it up in my Bible because it's hard for me to see sideways here. Verse 3. For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For it is a minister of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. Therefore, it is necessary to be in subjection, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. For because of this you also pay taxes, for rulers are servants of God, devoting themselves to this very thing. Render to all what is due them, tax to whom tax is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, and honor to whom honor. And today, that's what we're doing, is we're honoring. And keep in mind, Paul wrote this about the Roman Empire. This wasn't written about 21st century America, where we have all these freedoms, where the Bill of Rights guarantees us the right, freedom of religion. We can go to any church we want to, or no church if we don't want to. We have that freedom here in this country. But in Rome, I think Nero was running Rome at this time, who was, a very evil ruler. But and he still said this. So it's appropriate that we honor our country, and we do these things to recognize, and celebrate what we have here. I wanted to read something else here to you. It's by a man named Douglas Leslie. He's the president of the Christian Ministry, or was the Ministry Alliance back in July of 2021, but it still applies today. It says, we live in a Christian subculture that will invariably chide anyone who exuberantly applauds and celebrates July 4th. They will scream and use their intellectual prowess to try and show that you really worship culture, white supremacy, nationalism, etc. Don't fall for it, it's a lie. Like other federal holidays, July 4th should be celebrated with great joy and gratitude. Why? Because we are thankful for the sacrifice of those who have gone before us to blaze the trails and lay the foundations of what is arguably the greatest nation to have ever been formed in global history. For this, every American should celebrate. Without that sacrifice, we would not be able to have any of the freedoms this country affords its citizens, including those that, because of this sacrifice, allows others to boisterously proclaim disapproval. Every citizen of every ethnicity, of every skin color and subculture can celebrate that they can live in freedom. If we cannot stop and celebrate Independence Day, then we cannot celebrate any other day. Christmas, family birthdays, Memorial Day, Labor Day, Juneteenth, Martin Luther King Day. These all became days that can be seen as idolatry, but they're not, and neither is Independence Day. Our celebration is one of gratitude for the greatness of our country, although Jesus is greater. Our celebration is one of joy for the privilege of living in the United States, although joy in Jesus is greater. Our celebration is one of remembrance for those who gave their lives to secure our freedoms, although our freedoms through Jesus' death are greater. Our Christian commitment to Scripture and the holiness of God is not reduced to our expressions of gratitude for our country. If your church sings a patriotic anthem, sing wholeheartedly. It doesn't replace your worship. If your church does not take part in this manner, that's okay too. It doesn't mean your church is led by a religious Marxist. Our country is large and wide and deep with all sorts of approaches to holidays. We don't proclaim our joy and gratitude at the expense of our commitment to God. I'll read that again. We don't proclaim our joy and gratitude at the expense of our commitment to God. We simply express our celebration for the providence of the birth of our country. Our ultimate commitment is to God and His kingdom, and each year we pause on July 4th to celebrate the birth of our nation. It's okay to do so. So, just a few thoughts there on celebrating the 4th while we're here in church. Now, I ran across a list here. I guess NBC News took a poll of Americans, being our 250th anniversary at landmark celebrations like that. We look back, and they said, what are the top achievements of America? They polled Americans and said, in the last 250 years, what would you say are the top achievements of our country? I'm sure you're thinking of something. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to, well, here's the list. See if you agree with this list or what. Number 1 listed is abolition of slavery. And actually, I'm glad that that's on the list, way up there. Because too often I think we always hear about how we had slaves in this country and what a stain it is, and not disputing any of that, that's fine. But people forget we also abolished slavery. Over 600,000 Americans died to get rid of slavery in the Civil War. I heard a historian actually today on the radio on the way into church, and he said that the 8 colonies in the North before the Civil War were the first ones to make slavery illegal in a place where it was legal. The first place anywhere in the world ever to do that. And so I think that's an important one, that we remember that, yeah, we had slavery and we shouldn't look past that, but we also shouldn't look past the fact that we abolished it, and it came at a great cost. It wasn't some lawmakers just passed a law and that was it. It came at great cost. Number 2 listed here is civil rights. And of course, when you think of civil rights, you think of the 50s and the 60s and Dr. Martin Luther King and the various marches they had. And while slavery had been abolished 100 years before, there was a lot of progress that needed to be made, certainly before then. Number 3 was victory in World War II. And a man from his 60s from Washington said the Allies' dominance helped preserve Western values, adding, if we had lost, freedom would have been lost. You look at what was being offered by Hitler and Mussolini and all of them, it's the opposite of that. It's the essence of freedom that was won. You kind of just go back to democracy won over fascism. I grew up after World War II, obviously, and see all the war movies and how we won, and it's kind of thrilling. But there was no guarantees. There's a series on right now on the History Channel. It's narrated by Tom Hanks. It's 10 parts. And it talks about some of the major battles of the war. And going in, we had no guarantees of winning. It was dangerous, it was risky, like all wars are. And especially after we got hit in Pearl Harbor, I'm not sure that the Japanese really knew how much damage they did to our Navy there. And thankfully America came through and the Allies came through and we won. But yeah, that was the big thing. Number 4 is women's rights. Up until 1920, women didn't have the right to vote. And women, how do you feel about that? I think that it's a good thing, wasn't it? Yeah. An older woman in California named women's suffrage as the greatest success of the United States said to pave the way for further rights, responding, there's more opportunity to further people's education than there used to be. I'm an educator, I can see the difference from when I started in the 70s. There's more money for scholarships, more opportunity to get a good education. So it's not just the women's rights, but then the rights that followed. Number 5, the Declaration of Independence, which of course we talked a little bit about here today. Number 6, voting and democratic rights. We all have the right to vote. Well, as long as you're 18, right? 18 years old, you have the right to vote. And one vote doesn't count any more than another. And it's an important thing. Number 7 is interesting. It's kind of a generic one called scientific advancements. Look at all the scientific breakthroughs that we've had here in this country. It says, America has been behind countless discoveries and inventions that have saved lives and transformed society, including pivotal vaccines, disease eradication, renewable energy development, telephones, the internet, and modern air conditioning. It's funny, I don't really think of air conditioning as a big deal, but it really is. I happened to be up in the desert this week, and it was like in the 90s, which isn't too bad for this time of year. Without air conditioning, it would be a lot more uncomfortable. And it's actually something of an issue right now, because in Europe they're experiencing a heat wave, and they don't have air conditioning. Not like we do here. I'm sure some places do, but it's not like it is here, and they're not used to that kind of heat. So it's really a big deal. We've been able to, what would Phoenix be if they didn't have air conditioning? I don't know. Number 8, it lists global and international global influence and diplomacy. It says the United States history of world-shifting diplomacy is extensive, from co-founding and hosting the United Nations to forming NATO in Washington, D.C., to JFK's establishment of the Peace Corps and President Carter's facilitation of the 78 Camp David Accords between Egypt and Israel. And you can go on, but those are just a few of the items you would mention. Civil War and Reconstruction. After the war, we had to put the country back together again, of course. That's what the Reconstruction refers to. Says under President Lincoln's leadership, the Union prevailed over the Confederacy and slavery was abolished. Then began the Reconstruction era, which sought to reunify the divided nation while expanding voting rights for black men and establishing birthright citizenship. Number 10 is one of my favorites. I always think of it as the highlight, if you will, of scientific achievement in my lifetime anyway, is the moon landing in 1969. It says a man from Idaho in his mid-20s, somebody in their mid-20s who obviously wasn't alive then, told pollsters that the Apollo missions were the most impressive to him because it showed the extent of America's scientific advancement, saying, I mean, technology at the time wasn't exactly very good. I don't know how they did it, but they put somebody up there. It's really kind of amazing they were able to do that with 1960s technology. I think he's right. Most of us carry in our pockets or our purses little computers, our telephones, and we take it for granted now, don't we? But back then, I mean, the computers filled up rooms, and I remember this was probably 20 or 30 years ago. I heard that the average car has more computing power on it than did the spaceship that went up to the moon. So it really is pretty remarkable achievement to land man on the moon. And we're back in the space race again. The Artemis, was it Artemis 1 or Artemis 2 that just recently went up around the moon? It's the first time in years. We watched the splashdown when it returned, and it was kind of inspiring. I thought, there's a whole generation out there, I'm looking at you young people, who never saw splashdowns because they had the space shuttles which just came and landed. But those of us who are of a certain age remembered the splashdowns and the ships picking up the astronauts in the middle of the ocean. Number 11 is the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Of course, that's one of the great achievements. I mean, we still have our republic that runs on the Constitution. And the Bill of Rights, the people always talk about the First Amendment because there's so many freedoms. And again, one of the most important to us here in church today is the freedom of religion. We don't have to worship anybody or anything if we don't want to. We get to choose. And that's how our founders set it up. And I know it's maybe not popular to say, but I believe we're a Christian nation. Because of what our founders believed, what we have written in documents, legal documents. I read to you what the Liberty Bell said. I mean, the Bible played an important role. And even if you look at the songs that we sing, throughout the years, the Battle Hymn of the Republic, the first song we sang, While God is Marching On, America the Beautiful, God Shed His Grace on Thee. That was probably, I think, in the 1900s. God of Our Fathers. It just permeates our culture. And so to pretend that it's not important or that we're not a Christian nation, I just think is fooling yourself. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be a Christian. There's no law. We're not a theocracy. But the underpinnings of who we are as a people and a government certainly has Christian underpinnings. Number 12 is space exploration. We've talked about that. Number 13 they listed as the Industrial Revolution. From the 1700s on, America has been instrumental in inventing things. It mentions cotton gins, sewing machines, steel plows, assembly lines, steamboats, railroads, electric light bulbs, and assembly lines are among the countless things that quickly transformed the nation. Again, I'll pull out my phone. The computer, when was Apple Computer? Like in the 80s, I think that it came out? And like 20 years later, they came out with these phones. And who doesn't have a phone now? Do you remember life before telephones? Sometimes I'll watch a police show from the 90s, and they're going somewhere, and I'm like, why don't you just call them and tell them you're... They have to pull over and put a dime in the phone. We didn't have them. So we just get used to this stuff. 14, the Revolutionary War and Freedom. Of course, the Revolutionary War is the one that we fought after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And number 15, the New Deal and economic recovery. And of course, that followed the Great Depression after the market crash in 1929. So I don't know if any of those were on your list of our greatest achievements, or all of them, or none of them, or some of them, but that's what the poll said. And I thought it was kind of an interesting poll. And I think, as we celebrate, it's important to take a look at what we take for granted. Somebody said, if you want to know what's wrong with America, listen to the news. But if you want to know what's right with America, drive across the country. Visit all the towns and the people and places, and you'll really see what this country stands for. Craig Ferguson, you may or may not know of him, but he's a comedian. He used to have a late show on CBS, and he's a comedian, and he's from Scotland. And he wrote a book a while back called American on Purpose, and it's basically his story of why he became American and why he loves this country. And he has a show on CNN, I think it's 6 episodes, titled the same thing, American on Purpose. And it goes on about how he is coming over and as an immigrant, why he became an American, and why he loves this country. And he unabashedly says how much he loves this country. And I read a review. You might think, well, it's on CNN, so it's going to be, criticizing the U.S. And he said, I told them before I put it on, this show could go on any network. It can go on CNN, it can go on Fox, it can go on any network, because this is a celebration of America. This is what I love about this country. And it's entertaining because he's a comedian, so he brings up a lot of funny things. He did an episode on capitalism, and so he decided to show how it works, and he set up a haggis taco stand in New York. Well, haggis is something, I guess, that Scots eat that's just some kind of disgusting meat. I think it's internal organs or something. It's just awful. But it was just kind of a funny way to show how people can start businesses. But one of the things in one of the first episodes that struck me, and this one was about immigrants, he was talking to a guy, and I forget what country he was from, in Maine, who had come here and he'd started his own business. And he asked him, he says, what is it about America, the freedom here in America that really hits you? And he thought for half a second, he says, I can go out and I can get in my car and I can drive 3,000 miles across the country and be in California. And I don't have to tell anybody. I can just do it whenever I want to. And it kind of struck me that, yeah, we can do that. I just take it for granted. I don't even give it a second thought. But people coming from other countries, they don't have those kind of freedoms that we have. There's so many things that we do and take for granted here as our freedom. And like I said, we take it for granted. We just do it and maybe don't even appreciate it as much as we should. I sometimes talk about sports, and one in particular, but I'm not going to talk about that sport today. I'm going to talk about just briefly about a sport that I don't care at all about, and that sport is soccer. And I really don't. I've tried to kind of pay attention to it, and now that the World Cup is here, I remember they were talking about, this year in 2026, the World Cup is coming to America, and the Olympics. Well, the Olympics I think are a great thing. The World Cup, I don't care. I hope America does well, but I don't care. I learned a couple weeks ago. This to me is why soccer I don't care about. Do you know how long soccer match lasts? Yeah, I didn't either, but I had, 90 minutes, yeah. A friend came over that wanted to watch a soccer match. He was over at our house. And he had played soccer when he was younger and stuff. It's like, okay. And then my grandson loves it, so he tells me things about it. But he said the soccer match is 90 minutes. I'm like, oh, okay. But it's not 90 minutes. Because the clock runs for the whole 90 minutes. And if someone falls down and gets hurt, the clock keeps running. So at the end of 90 minutes, the judges determine, well, here's how much time we spent not playing. So they add a certain amount of time at the end. But it differs after every game. So you really don't know how long the game is going to be. I'm like, what kind of a sport is this? You don't even know how long the game's going to be. Anyway, just my my rant about soccer there. But I know it's a really popular sport. And the World Cup is, it really is, to the rest of the world, it's a big deal. The rest of the world calls it football. We call it soccer here. But one of the things that I'm glad about for the World Cup, which I didn't realize, is all the visitors that have come over here to America have suddenly discovered what a great place this is. As I mentioned in the beginning, if you want to know what's wrong with America, listen to the news. If you want to know what's right, visit America. Drive across the country. And just want to read some stuff here. This is from a lady named Gillian Anderson King with Fox News. It says, World Cup soccer fans are discovering America's greatness. It's time Americans did too. International visitors documented a version of America their media never showed them. As America prepares to celebrate its 250th birthday, we received an unexpected gift from millions of World Cup visitors, a fresh reminder of what makes America exceptional. Tourists from dozens of countries descended on American cities this summer. They'd been warned about an angry, divided, dangerous country in irreversible decline. Instead, they found something so ordinary it became extraordinary, a country that looked nothing like the headlines they'd been told to believe. They found strangers holding doors, police officers posing for photos with kids, neighbors grilling in backyards, firefighters waving tourists over to see their fire engines, packed churches and thriving businesses, communities celebrating together, not defined by the partisan noise that dominates their televisions back home. And they posted all of it to social media. In the process, they created what may be the most effective marketing campaign America never paid for. Millions of visitors documenting in real time a version of America that looked nothing like the one portrayed in so many headlines. Scotland fans wearing kilts and playing bagpipes marched to Fenway Park in Massachusetts on June 14th. Visitors went viral marveling at the everyday abundance America offers. They posted videos gushing over free refills and ice water that just shows up at the table. No charge, no questions asked. At Buc-ee's, which I don't know if that's a gas station or a store or something, which foreign tourists treated like a national monument, they marveled at the spotless restrooms, brisket sandwiches, and seemingly endless abundance. At Waffle House at 1 in the morning, they treated it like a Michelin-starred restaurant. I don't know if you've ever been to a Waffle House. I have, and they're dumpy little places. I like them. I mean, I think they're really good, but they're kind of a dumpy place. But it says here they treated them like a Michelin-starred restaurant. At Costco and Walmart, where entire aisles are devoted to a single product category. This one is funny. At Bass Pro Shops, which more than a few tourists genuinely mistook for a theme park. The reaction wasn't isolated. Across social media and international news coverage, visitors kept reaching the same conclusion. British visitors made headlines with a blunt admission that has since gone viral. We were wrong about Americans. Reuters documented visitor after visitor leaving with a fundamentally changed view of the United States. Axios captured the moment tourists discovered free chips and salsa and nearly lost their minds. It would be easy to laugh at all of this, but we should be paying very close attention to what's actually happening here. These visitors aren't amazed by free refills. They're amazed by what free refills represent. They're seeing for the first time and with fresh eyes the product of 250 years of freedom, capitalism, hard work, and the most audacious political experiment in human history. A grocery store with 50 cereal options isn't normal globally. Air conditioning in nearly every building isn't normal globally. Endless consumer choice, convenience on demand, food available at any hour, none of it is normal. We've simply lived here long enough to forget that and have taken much of America's abundance for granted. And it goes on, but you get the idea. It's pretty amazing when you see our country through the eyes of somebody else and the things that we have that we just take for granted and get used to. But we're blessed. God has blessed us to live in a place that's so free, and the abundance that we have and the freedoms that we have, they're just not seen around the rest of the world. And I believe, again, this is opinion, but I believe that it's because we are a nation that has looked to God. There's a picture that the Museum of the Bible is showing, and it's a George Washington on his knees before Valley Forge. And George Washington, we've told the story before and we're running out of time here, but George Washington's life was spared in so many ways throughout his life that preachers at the time and historians even today say that it wasn't by accident. That there was one, I mean, he was, for his day, he was considered a really big guy. He was like 6'2", he rode on a big white horse, and he got shot at like 4 or 5 times. It knocked his hat off, it went through his coat, and never touched him. Didn't even wound him, nothing. And he experienced a few episodes like that where he dodged death. And people really believe that it was divine providence, the term they use for God, that protected him because he had bigger things to do. They called George Washington the indispensable man. Without him, we wouldn't have the country that we have today. But here we see a picture of him because he knew where his power came from. He's on his knees praying. And I think that's an important thing we need to continue to do in this country, is look to God for our guidance. You may like your leader, you may not like your leader, but we know where our power comes from. It comes from God. And for each of us as individuals and collectively as individuals and as a society, that's who we worship, and I believe God has blessed us for that. So just a few thoughts on why we celebrate. I think we have a country worth celebrating for sure. We certainly have a God worth celebrating and thanking him for all that he has blessed us with. And I think we have a closing song. Find it again.